Today with us, we have Ryan Howard, co-founder and CEO of 100 Plus. We're at the 5th International Vatican Conference. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit more about what is remote monitoring and why is it so important for the future?
Yeah, remote monitoring really enables a patient that is typically chronic to effectively gather data from themselves and have that data automatically transported to the doctor. So pragmatically, what this means is that a patient with hypertension would get a connected blood pressure cuff. And by connected, I would mean cellular by that. And if they're taking their reading on a daily basis, the data would automatically flow to a set of tools that the doctor uses. And ideally, the doctor is getting data from their entire patient population that is at risk. And the tools would identify those that are outside of a safe range and allow the doctor to effectively triage the most at-risk population or the people who have the most risk for that current day.
So this really goes hand in hand with telemedicine. So you can actually hear, get a response of a change in a result and then have able to interact with the patients in their home.
Absolutely. Traditionally telemedicine, especially pre-pandemic, really was just used for more mundane and I would say superficial type diagnoses. So if you have the flu or a common cold or an earache, the struggle with telemedicine is that if there's no data, we have a quote at our company 100 Plus is that, without data, a telemedicine call just becomes a FaceTime with grandma. And so effectively, as a doctor yourself, when you're seeing a patient, if you don't have basic diagnostic data, so vitals, blood pressure, weight, et cetera, and then, obviously, diagnostics from labs become really critical in determining what's wrong with the patient. The ability to solve that visit remotely can only happen about 40% of the time. So imagine getting in an Uber and having them take you through a ride to the city and more than half the time drop you off at the wrong location and having to take a second ride. And by a second ride, I mean having a telemedicine visit, discovering half the time or 60% of the time it can't be solved, and then having to go to the doctor in person for a whole nother visit, which is, it's made telemedicine previously pretty painful.
So it sounds like you're saying it's not just improved quality, but there's actually economic benefits that you can reduce waste.
Absolutely. In 2019, Medicare invoked their own remote patient monitoring program, and the value of the program is about $60 billion. And the rationale behind the program was to eliminate or curb episodic care. And so what I mean by that is that Medicare is highly efficient as an example, for a payer. And so a visit, whether it's telemedicine or in person, usually reimbursed a doctor or a practitioner about $50. The problem is that the barrier to entry to the visit for the patient, especially a senior citizen, because they're so capital or cash constrained, the average American senior citizen makes about $17,000 a year on Social Security. So they're impoverished no matter how you look at it. They cannot afford a Lyft or an Uber to get to the doctor's office. This same patient, the typical profile is that they have 3 or more chronic conditions. So they should be seeing the doctor at least once a month, if not once a week, with 3 chronic conditions. And what we're seeing right now is that they're seeing the doctor roughly once every 10 months. And so that $50 a month visit, or that $50 visit, if it was, obviously extrapolated throughout the year, would be about $600 of cost to Medicare. But what's happening is that the patient's obviously not going to the doctor, being evaluated, and that chronic condition gets exacerbated over time. And so it goes from a binary of 0 to a 1, where instead of going to primary care to solve their issue, they're going to the ER. And that visit literally costs nearly 1,000 times as much. It's roughly a $45,000 visit if the patient stays at the hospital for 3 days. So the economic benefit is tremendous. And then the program is set up in such a way where it's highly beneficial, obviously, to the patient by obviously curbing episodic care, but the economics that are shared back with the practitioner are significant too in the programs that we've seen come to fruition.
And you're focused to heart disease, diabetes. What other areas for the future do you see this extending pretty quickly?
Yeah, I see, on the chronic condition front, all the major chronic conditions are starting to be tackled. So hypertension, diabetes. But beyond that, what we're seeing is that the newer devices there's 2 things that are different. One, they're getting more into diagnostics. So the ability to remotely infer a patient has a diagnosis such as COVID is happening now through tools such as O2 saturation, for example, and temperature, which are devices that a number of our RPM providers actually have today. Where we see the market going over the next few years is the devices today look like traditional devices that you would go buy at a Walgreens, but they're usually cellular or Bluetooth enabled, and they send data automatically to the practitioner. Over the next few years, the devices are becoming more and more passive and non-invasive. So imagine a watch, and these are available today, but they're not quite FDA approved, but a watch that would detect blood glucose and blood pressure in perpetuity without the patient intervening, and obviously would gather significantly more data about the patient as well. So this is where we see the market going. And obviously the lack of invasiveness and the lowering the bar for especially an elderly person who's at much higher risk, it really greases the skids to allow the masses to adopt a product like this.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Ryan Howard of 100 Plus. We look forward to watching the progress and continuing to see how remote monitoring will really make a difference to improve human health in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.